All right, hey guys. So in class and in the other tutorials, we learned how to create and manipulate the polygon primitives. We even covered the difference between object mode and component mode in order to edit the basic shapes of those primitives. However, we found the limitations of that, right? We were kind of limited by the defined number of components, whether that's vertex, edges, or faces, and we did learn how to add more subdivisions to the mesh to mess around with the sculpt geometry tools. But that just added a bunch more divisions, made the cube much more complicated. But it was still just a cube, right? Kind of boring. So how do we actually edit this model to be something totally different? Well, we can be specific about where we add those extra divisions, which give us more detail, and then make the changes as we add those divisions. So it's very important to note, though, before we dive too deep, that just like any form of art, don't get too caught up in the detail work quite yet. We want to focus on blocking out those main forms. But I will show you how to add those details. So let's jump onto the screen. All right, so I'm going to try and do this quickly, but just to review once again, we have our cube, and we've learned how to move this by going to W and having it selected. We can move it around. E, rotate. Remember to be doing this by constraining it to these axes. Very important, especially as we get into these more detailed things. And scale, which is R. You can grab this one in the center, though, to scale it uniformly. So that's component, or this is object mode. Sorry. And then if you hold right click over your object, you have edge, face, vertex. Here's object mode in the top right. I'm going to go to vertex for now. Or maybe let's go to edge. I'm going to hold right click, go to edge. I can select this, and I'm grabbing it in each one of these axes and moving this around. This control is super important for what we're getting used to. So I'm going to use this as an example to show you some of these new modeling tools. So number one, it's super important that we don't add too much detail all at once. I want you guys to really take an iterative approach, add a little bit of detail, and make the most of it as much as you can. Get as close to the shape you're trying to get to, and then add more detail. For instance, you can see how if we added a whole bunch of divisions, and I wanted to make this maybe I want it's like too small. That's just one piece. If I would have had to move all of this, look at that. That's too much detail to be working with. This is silly. Unless I wanted a really spiky cube. But there's better ways to do that. I'm going to go back, undo all that junk. This is garbage. Okay, cool. I'm back to my cube. Now, again, we're going to add more detail. And one of the ways you can do that is by creating a new edge. Let's say if I want to cut right down the center of this so I have a new edge to be working with, or a loop of edges. Well, there's a tool for that called Insert Edge Loop. So if you go to your mesh tools, there's an Insert Edge Loop tool. What's cool about all these tools is as you click on them, there'll be a little pop-up that tells you how to use it. It says click, drag on edges. So if I click and drag on this vertical edge, it'll give me a dotted line about where it's going to be dropped. I'm clicking and holding right now. I'm going to kind of estimate right down the center. I'm going to drop that in and let go. Now I still have the edge loop tool selected, so if I continue to try to select this or something, I'm going to accidentally drop another edge loop. So instead, this is where that selection tool comes into play. So I'm going to press Q. Now I can go about selecting this edge loop. So I can hold Shift and select each one of these. But this is kind of a slow way to go about it, and what I want to do is kind of show you guys how to kind of work like pros. So what I'm going to do instead is just double click on that edge. So Maya is able to tell that this is a loop of edges, so it grabs all of those edges. Now, since it's a symmetrical loop around this circle, I can actually go to my scale tool. If I scale it from the center, it'll scale equally outwards in all these different directions. And this is a really powerful idea to understand because you can model all sorts of cylindrical things. So let's actually do that with this. I'm going to go back to object mode. Sorry, I do this really quickly. I'm going to delete this and start fresh with a new cube, a brand new baby-faced cube. And I'm going to scale it so it's a little bit more vertical like this, just like we did in class. Only this one, I'm going to turn it into a vase. So I'm going to go Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop Tool, and right about in the center. So I'm kind of splitting the difference because I can get the closest to my intended shape. I'm going to try and make a vase. So I'm going to make this right in the center and kind of scale that down. Okay, that looks good. If I ever realize that I have one side selected or something, and you can see how it becomes no longer symmetrical, I can just undo, Command Z, and then double click on that, and then spin my camera around to make sure that I have the correct selection. That's an important habit to kind of get into. It helps a lot. Then I'm going to go back to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop Tool, and I can split the difference right here. This way I'm kind of making the biggest difference in my model to try and make it as close to what I'm trying to get to as I can. I'm going to press, I'm going to go to Mesh Tools and insert edge loop one more time and do this. And I'll switch to Q or R. I'll use R instead to go to my scale tool. And you can see I'm starting to kind of craft a vase. Now I'm going to start going a little bit quicker. So I'm going to kind of carve this in, maybe drop in an edge right here. And if I scale that out, it starts to be the same distance as this guy. And it kind of looks all right. I'm really kind of a messy little vase, but I think it will hold water. Let's see. So let's say I realize that that's not really the shape I want. I want to edit this edge loop. I can just double click on that. Again, with Q selected. If you can actually notice my stylus is this arrow. If it's this, then that's probably you still have the edge loop tool selected, and you can actually see that right here. If I press Q, it'll come to this guy. So I'm going to switch to actually my scale tool, scale this out, and I'm actually going to scale this down to trying to make a pretty vase here for you guys. All right, that's pretty enough. I might take my time and use some images as reference if I wanted to make it look really beautiful. But you can see how I kind of used edge loops to carve away this silhouette and start making it a beautiful vase. However, it's still pretty squarey and boxy. I don't really like that. So I'm going to go back to Mesh Tools, or I can press G to repeat the last tool. So I'm going to press G as in good, and I'm going to look at the grid, and I can see that this is one of my axes right here. So I'm going to actually try to line it up with that right there. Now, instead of scaling from the center, which would also make it scale vertically, I can just scale it out in this width, and I can kind of make it rounded a little bit. I'm going to do the same on this side. I'm going to press G to repeat my last tool, or I could just go up to Mesh Tools, insert edge loop. I'm going to click and drag right on that center part of this grid, go to my scale tool, which is R, and I can grab this and scale it out in the width. And all of a sudden, I have this beautiful vase. So that's kind of the power of the insert edge loop tool. I'm going to do another one really quickly right here, and you can kind of just watch how this works. I'm going to create and now I have this beautiful wine goblet. Well, beautiful is a relative term, but hey, you guys appreciate my work, right? So that's one of the most powerful tools with modeling is the insert edge loop tool. I use that all the time, and actually it's one half of the two most powerful tools, which is I'm about to show you the other one, which is the extrusion tool. So I can insert an edge loop, and I can use it as a ring around this model to expand it outwards or scale it in. I could also move it around, but you can see how that starts to skew this cylindrical body shape. So instead, let's go ahead and start with a new model and show you this new tool.